Good evening and welcome to all of you. I am Kate Levesque, an alumna and president of Ursuline Academy, and we are delighted to have you with us this evening as we continue our 75th anniversary celebration. We began our celebration 2 weeks ago with a beautiful Mass at St. Cecilia's Church in the Back Bay of Boston, just a stone's throw from our original campus on the corner of Arlington Street and Commonwealth Avenue. And we're going to continue this 75th anniversary celebration straight through until June of 2022. Tonight, we kick off our speaker series, and we are pleased and grateful to have Father James Martin with us, and really just delighted. For those of you who haven't yet had a chance, I can say his book of Learning to Pray, just wonderful, and I urge you to get your hands on a copy if you can. When we began the celebration of our 75th, or the planning of it, one of our goals was to foster community over the coming year, to help alumni reconnect, to rediscover one another, and to strengthen people's ties with Ursuline. And we are 2 weeks into this anniversary celebration, and already I can tell that we're going to be doing a good job in that department because of all of you. I had the privilege at Mass 2 weeks ago to watch two classmates from the class of 1957 reconnect with one another. They had not spoken to each other since graduation, and yet it seemed to me that they picked up right where they left off. So that's the type of community that we are blessed with and that we are so pleased to celebrate here tonight, and just really delighted to have each one of you here. We have alumni with us from California, from Florida. Truly, one of the pandemic silver linings is that we can gather together through the technological miracle of Zoom. We have grandparents with us from Anchorage, Alaska. So we are well represented across the United States, and eager to get started with Father Jim's remarks. I'm going to turn this over now to my colleague and fellow alumna, Mary Kate Tracy, who is our principal and director of mission, and to who we owe a debt of thanks because it was Mary Kate who helped bring Father Martin to us this evening. So Mary Kate, over to you.
Thanks, Kate, and welcome to everyone. It's wonderful to be gathered together this evening and to celebrate our 75th year in Boston and in Dedham of Ursuline education. Tonight, we are also honored to have with us Father James Martin. Father Jim, I am with you daily in your inbox. You have been incredibly gracious in the time that you have spent with our Ursuline community this year. And I know that you have been with other Ursuline communities recently. For those of you who are not familiar with Father Jim, although he is famous to all of us, Father Jim is a Jesuit priest, the editor of America magazine, a best-selling author, including the Jesuit Guide to Almost Everything for those of us educated by the Jesuits, and of course, his most recent book, Learning to Pray, a Guide for Everyone, which he'll be sharing on this evening. So Father Jim, welcome. It's good to see you online and not just in our inbox.
Thank you, Mary Kate, and thank you to Kate Levesque and everyone at Ursuline for inviting me. I feel so welcome. The first thing I want to say is happy anniversary, happy 75th anniversary, and 75 incredible years of education, and really of an example in the line of St. Angela Merici. And so congratulations on all the amazing things you do. And how wonderful that story about the two alumni from 1957. It's just such a beautiful story, and it just shows the value of what you do and the great ministry that you're doing. So I'm just really happy to be with you here, and it's a real honor. And I'm happy to be with alumni and members of the community and grandparents and some students tonight to talk about prayer, something Angela Merici did a lot of and something she knew a lot about. And yet we sometimes think that prayer is only for people like Angela Merici or Pope Francis or St. Catherine of Siena, whose feast day we celebrate today. And one of the reasons I wrote this book, Learning to Pray, a guide for everyone, is to remind people, as the subtitle says, that prayer is for everyone. You don't have to be a saint to pray. And we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. So I'll talk for about 25 minutes to a half an hour, and then I'm much more interested in hearing your questions about prayer. So as I said, the subtitle of the book is "Everyone Can" is a guide for everyone, and the first sentence in the book is "Everyone can pray." Now, a lot of us doubt that, right? And I always think it's important to kind of cut to the chase. Why do we doubt that? Well, simply put, many of us, and I think I would say many of us on this Zoom call tonight are Catholic. Many of us are told and we believe that God wants us to participate in an active prayer life. We're told all the time that, prayer is an important part of the spiritual life. And I think that most Catholics would say that they are aware of and that they experience God in their daily life. So if you say, well, do you experience God through your children or your grandchildren? Oh, absolutely, through their love. And I feel a sense of God's love, and I feel God's love for them. Do you experience God in the Mass? Yes, through the sacraments. I get very moved, or I might go out in nature. I myself spent a lot of time at East. I did a lot of my Jesuit training in the Boston area, so I know the area well. I do a lot of retreats at Eastern Point Retreat House in Gloucester or Campion Center in Weston, and I love nature. So I think most of us would say that we can experience God through our daily lives. That's probably something that people are able to do. However, when it comes to prayer, when it comes to sitting down and spending one-on-one time with God, which is one way to look at prayer, we can get frustrated. Why is that? Well, because oftentimes we sit down, we close our eyes, and we don't know what's supposed to happen, right? Or we don't have any practices or techniques. Many of us know how to do rote prayer, standard prayer, formalized prayer, which is wonderful. Prayers like the Rosary, the Hail Mary, or the Our Father, right, which is an important part of the prayer life. But when we sit down to kind of do contemplative prayer and try to imagine God speaking to us, we might hear, oh, people say God was very active in my prayer this morning, or I felt God very close. We close our eyes and we don't really know what to expect. And sometimes it feels like nothing happens, right? So one of the reasons I wrote this book was to talk about the ways that we can pray. And also the sort of central part of the book is what happens when you pray. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about all those things tonight. So the first thing is, as I said, everyone can pray. All right. Now, because God desires a relationship with everybody. Now, you might say, well, that sounds a little strange. I mean, I believe that God created me and, God sustains me and God's with me, but God desires a relationship with me. What does that mean? Well, one of the things that we can say about the life of prayer is that we have a call to prayer and we feel that call to prayer. So there's a reason beyond just celebrating the 75th anniversary of your school of Ursuline that you're on a talk tonight about prayer. Okay, so you may doubt many things. You may doubt that, God, that you'll be able to pray. You may doubt that God wants a relationship with you, but you cannot doubt that at this moment you're interested in prayer. There's a desire for you for prayer. And we have to ask ourselves, where does that desire come from? Well, that desire comes from God, right? How else would God move us other than to put that desire for God within us? Do you know what I mean? How else would God awaken in us this sort of call other than to place that desire within us? So to take seriously the fact that your desire for prayer, your interest in prayer, your desire for more prayerful life is coming from God. So to see it as a call, to see it as a kind of an invitation from God. For people that start out in the spiritual life, that can make a lot less frightening because it's not just your own curiosity and it's not just you sort of stumbling blind, it's you're responding to God's call. So seeing that first thing, seeing that desire for prayer that you have right now, God's call. Okay. But what is prayer, right? What are we even talking about when we're talking about prayer? I'd like to go through just a few definitions that I found helpful in my life. The first is probably the most common. It's from St. John Damascene, who was a Syrian monk. He said, prayer is a raising of the mind and the heart to God, right? And an asking for good things from God. And that's a good prayer. That's a good definition. It's about the mind and the heart, right? We're raising ourselves up. We're asking God for something. Saint Therese of Lisieux, one of my favorite saints, said that prayer is a surge of the heart. It's a great thing. It's almost something you can't not do. It's a surge of the heart. It's kind of going out to God. But then that sort of begs the question, while we're lifting our minds and our hearts to God and while our hearts are surging, what's God doing? Like, well, what's God's sort of response? That's why Saint Teresa of Avila's definition, which is prayer is a mutual sharing between friends. Prayer is, it's almost like a conversation, mutual sharing. That gets into a little bit more about the relationship that I was talking about before. Walter Burkhardt, a Jesuit priest, late Jesuit priest, said that prayer is a long, loving look at the real. Isn't that great? It's not just about something out there. It's about the way that God is at work with us in our daily lives. And finally, to come back to the relationship model, one of my favorite definitions is from a Jesuit who, well known in the Boston area, Father Bill Barry, who was one of the founders of the Center for Religious Development that was out in Somerville for a while, great spiritual director, said that prayer is like a personal relationship with God. Okay, so what do we mean by that? Well, God wants to enter into a relationship. But Father Barry's insight is also that we can look at our life of prayer and compare it to a good friendship and sort of diagnose, in a sense, where it is. So, for example, let's look at prayer as a personal relationship. What makes for a good personal relationship? What makes for a good friendship? Well, one of the things would be time. Imagine if you said, so-and-so is my best friend, my closest friend. And I said, well, how much time do you spend with them one-on-one? And you would say, never. I never see them. I never text them. I never talk to them. I never see them. Do you ever spend time? No, never. I'm too busy. So you would say, what kind of a relationship is that? But sometimes that's the situation with God. We say God's the most important thing in my life or the most important person, but I never spend one-on-one time. Okay. So any relationship requires time. Honesty, right? I mean, imagine if there's something that's in between you and a friend that you're angry about, right? Or that you're disappointed about, or that you feel is inappropriate to talk about. What happens to the relationship? It gets kind of cold, gets kind of formal, gets kind of distant. So honesty is important. And openness to change, right? And openness to change. So imagine if to take that example of the people who haven't seen one another since 1957, right? If Kate Levesque was saying it is as they sort of picked up where they left off, which is lovely. And I know exactly what she means. But you would say, if these women who were, say in their whatever 70s or 80s are still relating to one another the same way they were when they were 17, you would say, well, that's kind of I don't know if that makes sense for the relationship, right? So our relationship with God will change over time as we get old and as we change. So change, time, honesty, all the things you can say about your prayer life, you can say about all the things you can say about a relationship with a good friend, you can say about your prayer life. So prayer is a personal relationship. And finally, the definition that I found most helpful in my life is that prayer is a conscious conversation that happens, a back and forth between you and God. Now, the difficulty, though, is this, and I want to get to kind of the hardest part. The difficulty is, what does it mean to have a relationship with God? What does it mean to pray to God and to listen for God's voice? Okay, because that can be really confusing for people. And I remember when I entered the novitiate in Jamaica Plain, not too far from where you are, in Boston in 1988, I would hear all the Jesuits say things like, oh, God was so close to me in prayer, or I felt God saying this to me in prayer, or I heard God's voice saying this. And I thought, what are you talking about? Like, well, what does that mean? Does that mean I hear voices or I see visions? And I think that's one of the main things that keeps Catholics away from prayer, because they don't know what to expect. They don't know what can come up in prayer. They don't know what's supposed to happen. They don't know what can happen. And when things do happen, they're not sure if it's really God or not. All right. So let's talk about probably the hardest topic in prayer, one of the hardest topics, which is kind of avoided by a lot of spirituality books, which is what happens in prayer. What happens when you pray? So let's just take a passage. Let's take the passage of the storm at sea. Okay, that's one that Pope Francis used at the beginning of the pandemic. It's a very vivid passage. I'm sure you all know, where Jesus is in the boat. The disciples are there. He's asleep. They think he doesn't care about them. And he says, don't you care? They say, don't you care about us? And he wakes up and stills the storm with a word. Let's say you're imagining yourself in that scene. This is just one way of praying. Let's say you're reading that passage, or you decide to pray over that passage, or that passage is talked about at Mass one day, and you decide you're going to pray with that passage. So what can happen when you pray? So let's say you're imagining yourself in that scripture scene, or you're just kind of reading the words. Well, the first thing that can happen is an insight. An insight can come up. So you might be praying with that passage, and you might say to yourself, you know what? I actually feel like I sometimes do the same thing. I sometimes ask Jesus where he is, and all along he's right there. And you have this insight that you're sort of doing what the disciples are doing. Okay. It's just kind of unlocks the story for you, reveals something about God, reveals something about yourself, reveals something about your situation and how you're reacting to it. So again, it's nothing emotional. You're not like crying or, terribly moved, but it's an intellectual insight. That's one thing that can happen in the life of prayer. The second thing that can happen is an emotion, very common. So let's say you're praying about the storm at sea. And, as I said, Pope Francis used this at the beginning of the pandemic. Let's say you are thinking about Jesus being asleep in the boat. And you hear the disciples, or, you imagine the disciples saying, "Don't you care about us?" And suddenly you kind of get angry yourself. You start to feel like, especially in the middle of this pandemic, and maybe you've lost loved ones or you've lost a job or you're frustrated. Where is Jesus? You've been praying, and he doesn't seem to be awake. He doesn't seem to be with you. And you start to get this anger, which seems to come out of nowhere. One of the things that can happen in prayer is that God raises these emotions up for us to look at, right? And so can you talk to God about your anger? Can you talk to God about the emotions you feel? That's certainly not the only emotion you could feel. You could feel a sense of joy. You could feel a sense of joy that, boy, you feel like you've gotten both of your vaccines now, and you feel like, boy, Jesus has stilled that storm in you. You have the sense of joy and the sense of peace for God, kind of in a sense, stilling things. Another thing that could come up is related to that is a feeling. You could have a feeling of calm. I'll tell you, last Sunday, I guess it was, I have a terrible time remembering things, was good. I think it was Good Shepherd Sunday, last Sunday. And I find that whenever I hear the passage of the Good Shepherd, I just find that so peaceful. I think I connected to the 23rd Psalm, and the Lord is my shepherd, and, green pastures, and just that word, just that phrase, the Good Shepherd. I find it very peaceful. I haven't spent a whole lot of time around sheep or shepherds or anything like that, or farms. But something like that, a feeling can come over you. Certainly in the pandemic and during these difficult times, when we feel a feeling of calm in the middle of our prayer, we can say that this might be one way God has of communicating with us. So insights, emotions, feelings, a memory can come up. A memory can come up in your prayer. So you might be praying with the storm at sea and feeling the sense of confusion. And suddenly you have this memory of a time when God was very close to you, and that God did still a storm in your life. And you say, well, maybe I should kind of be a little more trusting looking back. What else can come up? A desire. You might be praying with this reading and have suddenly, I wish I were the kind of person that could trust more. I really wish I could trust more. It's a desire, right? It's again, something that God is raising up. And I think one of the key things to say in this in this part of the conversation that we're having is that it's important to pay attention to these movements in prayer, because they're not just coincidences that happen. They're very likely things that God is raising up for you. This is the way we talk. This is what we mean when we talk about listening to God in prayer. What else could come up? Words and phrases come up sometimes. One of the guys in my house, whose name I will not say, was telling a story about going. It's kind of a funny story. He was in France studying, and he felt that God was he's a Jesuit priest. He felt that God was kind of absent in his prayer, and he didn't feel like he had a sense of direction in his sort of Jesuit life. He knew he wanted to be a Jesuit, but where God wanted him to go. So he said to himself, which is always dangerous, he said, well, I'm going to go to Chartres Cathedral, and I'm going to sit there until, it's kind of funny, I'm going to sit there until God sort of responds with, and my friend was saying he was expecting this kind of, like this, you should do this job or you should take this job in the Jesuits. And so he gets to Chartres and he sits down, and the stained glass window is so beautiful. And he sits down and he's ready to wait there for hours and hours, because his prayer had been dry. And he said to God, what do you want me to do? And he said, just within a few minutes, from the depths of his soul, the words came. He didn't know, and I want to be clear, he doesn't hear them physically or see them. He just sort of comes to his mind. The words, feed my sheep, come totally clearly to him. And he just laughed, and he thought, oh, that's, it's so beautiful. It's so perfect. It's so true. It's the way that God speaks to us. So sometimes occasionally words and phrases come up. Now, that doesn't mean that every single word or phrase that comes up in your mind during your prayer is from God, but something like that makes sense, right? I mean, that my friend would be told as a priest that, God wants him to feed my sheep. So all these things can happen: insights, emotions, memories, desires, words and phrases, feelings, right? And we need to take them seriously as ways that God has of communicating with us. This is probably the most, I think, misunderstood, and not because of anyone's fault, misunderstood aspect of the life of prayer, the kinds of things that can happen. All right, now that we know the kinds of things that can happen, let's look a little bit real briefly the kinds of prayer that we can do. Okay, so what kinds of prayer? And by the way, there's no right way or wrong way to pray. Everybody on this call probably has a favorite way to pray, and it may not be the same as everybody else's. Okay, one of the things I like to say, which shocks people, but it's true, is Saint Therese of Lisieux once said that the recitation of the rosary is as difficult for me as an instrument of penance. Okay, I mean, that's surprising, right? But she didn't like the rosary. That's okay. She's certainly not a bad Catholic, for Pete's sakes. She's a doctor of the church. We all don't have to pray in the same way. So let's look at a couple of ways to pray, knowing the kinds of things that can happen when we pray. The first is, to Therese's point, the first is standard or rote prayers. Okay, so we all know them. We say them every day: the Our Father, the Hail Mary, the Rosary, the Memorare, on and on and on. Now, a lot of times in the spiritual life, those things are denigrated, like, oh, you're just praying your rote prayers. But it's a very important part of our spiritual life, right? Oftentimes, rote prayers and standardized prayers express things better than we could. They're a wonderful way to sort of connect to the traditions. And some profound things can happen when people are praying, for example, the rosary. Okay, so rote prayers. Second kind of prayer is what we call Ignatian Contemplation. So Mary Kate was talking about people's Jesuit background, and I'm a Jesuit, and this is probably the way that the type of prayer that is most associated with the Society of Jesus, Ignatian Contemplation, also called imaginative prayer or contemplation of place. It's pretty simple. It uses your imagination to place yourself in a gospel passage. So I was doing a little of that in terms of the storm at sea. You actually imagine yourself. What do I see? What do I hear? What do I feel? What do I taste? Right? What do I smell? Sometimes the smell would be important if you're at the wedding feast of Cana, or the Last Supper. What does that smell like? And you see what comes up. And a lot of times the prayer can be much more personal because of a particular insight or emotion or a memory that comes up while you're imagining yourself in that scene. Now, not everybody likes that kind of prayer, right? And also, with all these kinds of prayer, it's important to try them out. And by the way, this is just a précis of everything is kind of spelled out a little bit more in the book, which makes the perfect gift for your friends and family. Another kind of prayer is Lectio Divina, which is Latin for sacred reading. Lectio Divina it's not as imaginative, but it looks at a scripture passage and it invites you to ask 4 questions. These are based on questions from Father Dan Harrington, who taught at Boston College and before that West End Jesuit School of Theology for many years. 1, what does the text say? So let's say imagine we're looking at the gospel reading for today, right? Which comes after the foot washing. Okay, it's about no slave is greater than his master, and you need to put these things in action. What does the text say? What is Jesus saying to the disciples here? Okay, blessed are you if you do these things, right? Beyond just knowing them. So you're looking at what Jesus is talking about in terms of servant leadership or creating a community of equals, all the things that he's saying. What does the text say to me? Well, maybe you think, wow, Jesus is saying in today's gospel, if you know these things, that's wonderful, but if you're more blessed if you do them. And maybe you say, boy, I as a Catholic or as a Christian, I'm actually not really good at putting that stuff in action. I mean, I talk a good game, but maybe that's a call for me. Third question is, what do you want to say to God about this text? So maybe you want to say to God, help me be a little bit more of a person of integrity. And then finally, what difference will this text make in your life, right? How will this change you? Because prayer should really change us. So that's Lectio Divina very briefly. Another way of praying is called the examination of conscience. This is an end of the day prayer that people use just to review the day and see what comes up. It's a very simple prayer. Again, I talk about it in the book. It's 5 steps. You place yourself in the presence of God, as we do in all prayer, right? So we remember it's not just a monologue. We remember things. We are grateful for things that come up. I'll remember we had a kind of a fun conversation before this started. We were laughing about different things. I'll remember that as something I'm grateful for, just new friends and being able to connect with people. As Kate said, even through the pandemic, we've been able to connect with people. And you so call to mind things you're grateful for. Savor them. Be grateful for them. Thank God for them. And then review the day. Go through the day and try to see where you encountered God. It's a great way to kind of look back and see where God was. We've all had the experience of saying, oh, I can, now that I look back, I can see where God was. It's a lot easier to see God in the past than it is in the present. And so the examination is good for that. And then you think about things you might regret, ask God for forgiveness, and then ask for the grace to see God in the next day. So the examination of conscience is a short 15 to 20 minute end of the day prayer where you can kind of see where God is. Another form of prayer is called centering prayer, right? Where it's sort of content-less, right? It's not a lot of images or words, or that appeals to people who just, they might not like all that stuff going on in terms of Ignatian Contemplation or Lectio Divina. Centering prayer, just use a prayer word like love or Jesus or God to sort of center you and experience God within your depths, which, again, remember, St. Paul said we're temples of the Holy Spirit and God dwells within us. So this is a way to just sort of imagine yourself in God's presence. And again, all sorts of things can come up. It's a little bit more about just being in God's presence and less sort of experiencing all these different things that we were talking about in the other prayers, but it's a popular way of praying. And then finally, what I would call nature prayer. It's such a beautiful, I know it's raining, it's been raining here, but it's such a beautiful time of year. And I don't think I've wanted spring more ever. And I see the trees and I feel it's just incredible. It's just so exciting. And so can you use nature as an image of God, for example? Can you let nature teach you about God? I think we're being taught a lot about renewal and rebirth this time of year, right? And it says something to us about the pandemic. So can nature be a way to invite you into the presence of God? So those are just a few different ways of praying. And before we turn to the questions, I want to talk about probably the second biggest challenge for people is distractions. Everyone says they're distracted. Thomas Merton said that if you've never been distracted, you've never prayed, right? Thomas Merton, the Trappist monk who knew something about prayer. We all get distracted. Look, all of us. So what do we do about it? It could be we're thinking about what we're going to have for dinner tonight, or we have a bad back, or we're worried about something serious like financial. Well, bad back could be serious, but financial problems or medical problems, or maybe there's a siren outside, or you're in an apartment and people are banging upstairs. So what do you do? Well, the first thing is to say, now, is this an unimportant distraction or an important distraction? A couple of years ago, a young Jesuit who sees me for spiritual direction came to me and said, I try to pray my examination every night, but every night I get distracted. I said, oh, what's the distraction? Well, there's this guy I had a fight with in my community, and his face just keeps coming up in front of me when I pray. And I said, maybe it's not a distraction. So can you discern whether or not these things are a distraction? Now, if that guy said to me, oh, I kept thinking about, the spare ribs we were going to have tomorrow night for dinner, you would say, well, that's probably not exactly what God is asking you to look at. So is it an unimportant or an important distraction? If it is an unimportant distraction, something that doesn't seem like it's something God is asking you to look at, what do you do with it? Well, try, I think, as far as possible to let it go. One of my friends says, bubbles, birds, and balloons. Can you think of it almost like bubbles coming up and then going away, or birds sort of flying in and out of your vision, or clouds, or balloons kind of coming up? One of my favorite images, which has really helped me a lot, is Margaret Silf, who's a Jesuit, who's a spiritual writer, does a lot of Ignatian spirituality. She said it's like driving a car, which is a great image. There's all sorts of stuff going on the side, right? And you notice it. There's people walking on the sidewalk, and there's cars, but you're focused on where you're going. Right. That's very much like prayer. There can be all sorts of things going on, and it's okay. You get distracted a little bit, but you're sort of focused. However, what happens after all this? You still can't let go of something. And I think the most difficult thing would be like physical pain, like you have a bad back or something really major. you have a, a medical diagnosis coming up, or you're worried about your children or your grandchildren. Well, then I think in addition to sort of bringing that up and trying to give it over to God, I think it's important to say to God, look, I'm distracted, but I'm still here. Right? That's okay to be distracted. If we think about it in terms of a relationship, imagine going out with your best friend and you haven't seen them for a while. And you say, I'm a little distracted tonight. I'm really sorry. I have a medical test going on, or I have my MCATs tomorrow, or I have my LSATs or whatever, or my classes. I have a big exam I have to give my class if you're a teacher. And your friend would probably say, that's okay. I get it. I'm just happy you're here. And if your friend can say that, how much more can God say that to us? So trust that God can be with us in our distractions. Anyway, so that's a little bit about my approach to prayer. There's a lot more in the book, Learning to Pray. Everyone can pray. Prayer is a relationship, the kinds of things that happen in prayer, the types of prayer we have, and what we can try to do about distractions. So I'm happy to talk with you and really interested in hearing your questions right now.
So Father Jim, thank you so much. That was wonderful. We have a few questions that people submitted ahead of time. And so we will be sure to get to those. I'm going to ask Mary Kate, perhaps if she could read those off. Other folks on the call, if you would like to submit a question, we can do this one of two ways. You're welcome to use the chat feature, and we will be monitoring that. Or if there's a pause or a break in the discussion, you're certainly welcome to unmute yourself and simply ask Father Jim your question as well. So Mary Kate, are we all set to ask some of the questions submitted beforehand?
We are, yes.
Great.
Thanks, Kate. So Father Jim, the first question that we have is, how does prayer help dealing with evil?
Wow, say that again. How does prayer help?
Yeah, we're starting off with a heavy hitter here. How does prayer help to deal with evil?
That's a great question. I don't think I've ever been asked that quite that way. Let me just think for a second. Well, I think a couple ways. Certainly, it helps us to respond to it, right? It certainly helps us to recognize it. I think most of us can recognize evil, right? If we see someone doing something mean, right? Or on a larger scale, if we see, what you might say a social sin, right? Where we see all sorts of, people suffering, like in India, you could say, what's going on with the coronavirus. That's an evil, in a sense, these poor people having to deal with this. It's a natural evil, right? And you could say it's also our responsibility. Anyway, I don't want to get into sort of politics here, but, and I think sometimes prayer can move us to right that wrong. So for example, if we're praying about the people in India and we do feel this sense of sadness or compassion, right? We have to take seriously that this is God's compassion working through us, right? And maybe God's invitation for us to act. Because how else would God move us, right? How else would God kind of make God's desires for the world known other than by moving through us? All right. So I think that's the first thing that we have to take seriously, that prayer moves us to combat evil, to fight evil. I also think in discerning things, prayer can help us understand what is coming from God and what is not coming from God. I'll use an example from the pandemic. It's not exactly an evil, but I think it's a good example of discernment. I found that one of the most helpful pieces of advice that this is from Jesuit spirituality, it's from Christian spirituality, that has helped people in the pandemic, is that the voice of God, this is very much from St. Ignatius, the voice of the good spirit, as Ignatius calls it, the voice that's coming from God, the voice that draws us towards God. And again, I don't mean like a physical voice, I mean the kind of impulse, is the voice of hope, uplift, consolation, calm, peace, right? The voice that's not coming from God is the voice of despair and hopelessness. And so when people were struggling with this during the pandemic, we all felt it. This is never going to get better. This is hopeless. I had a friend of mine say, I had a very good friend of mine who's actually a very thoughtful person, said, this is going to kill us all. It's like, and I said to him, yes, that is not the voice of God, right? That is despair and hopelessness. Okay. So to be able to discern between those voices and discern in a sense, in your own life, which voice you choose to listen to, which voice you choose to give power to. So it's a kind of an evil in a sense, because it draws us into despair and draws us away from God. And so I think discernment is another way that prayer can help us with evil, with facing evil. It's a great question. It's a really profound question.
You did an excellent job with that one. Thank you.
It was like my master's in divinity comprehensive exam.
Exactly, all at once, right? just to start us off. So the next one has to do with communal prayer opportunities for students or staff members at a school like Ursuline, where people come from different faith backgrounds or haven't been exposed to faith. How would you encourage that group to pray together?
That's a great question. And, the book talks mainly about sort of personal prayer, one-on-one prayer, because a book about communal prayer would have been so big, the Mass, and, as we know, the source and summit of Christian prayer in the Catholic Church. But I think it's important to recognize how essential it is to pray with one another, because we're human, we're social beings. There's a reason why Jesus called 12 people together and a whole group of people together, men and women, and didn't just have one assistant, right? He didn't have just Peter as his one assistant, because he knew that we needed to be together, and we worship together, and it's part of our makeup. I think in those situations, this is probably not the most original advice, but it's to focus on what unites. So our belief in God, for example, even if people come from different spiritual traditions and religious backgrounds, to focus on what unites. I think it's important for people to share what their own experience of God is in their tradition. I find that really helpful in those situations. Share a little bit about what your experience of God is like, how you pray, what your community does for prayer, and it can kind of enrich us. One of the great lines from Nostra Aetate, which is the Second Vatican Council's document on basically interreligious dialogue, is that the Catholic Church, I just love this, rejects nothing that is good and true in other religions. Such a beautiful statement. And so what can we learn from other religious traditions about God? Because God's bigger than the Catholic Church. God's not Catholic, right? If we had to fill in a blank, Jesus was Jewish. So God's not Catholic, and God's bigger than the church. And so we have to remember that therefore we can learn a lot from other traditions as well. And we can learn a lot from how they pray. I'll tell you something a little personal. So I live right near Central Park in New York, and I go running sometimes, like at the end of the day, like 4:30 or 5 o'clock, and I will run into Muslim, I don't know what you would call them, like pedicab. They have the pedicabs in Central Park at whatever the time is. I apologize for not knowing. And they face Mecca and they pray. I just find that so powerful. I'm not Muslim. And they don't believe in Jesus. I mean, they believe in him as a prophet, but not the way I do. I just find it so beautiful and so powerful and so simple. And, right in the middle of Central Park, they bring their prayer mats out. And so what can that teach me about God, about faith, and about my faith? So it's a beautiful thing to kind of learn from other people.
Beautiful way to build bridges to one another. Thank you. And with that, we open it up to all other questions.
So don't be shy.
Hi, Father Martin. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can.
Hi. I have a question. I'm an Ursuline alumni, class of 79, I have to say. And I've enjoyed your book very much.
Thank you.
One thought I have, how do you keep prayer from becoming too self-centered? I'm either always asking God for something, help me, help my children, help this, or help me be better. It feels uncomfortable to say, hey, God, how was your day today? How do you keep it from being all one-sided and all about me, and to try and get your prayer to a different level that's not so self-centered?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're right. You can't say, how was your day? I think that's a real challenge, because, so much of prayer is about our relationship with God. But I think as one of the keys is it's Catherine, right? May I call you Catherine?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Catherine, one of the keys is being aware of it. Right. And it's sometimes like in conversation, if you go out with a friend and you find you catch yourself, you find yourself, oh my gosh, all I'm doing is talking about myself. Right. And I'm not really listening. And so one of the keys is to have that kind of internal clock that says, all I'm doing is asking for things. Right.
Right.
Imagine if you went out with your friend and all you did, I mean, it's kind of funny to think about it, but imagine you went out with your friend and all you did was A, talk about yourself. Like that's all you did. Or B, ask for favors. And I need this, and I need this, and I need this. So what does that mean practically? Well, it means looking where God is active in other people. It means looking where God might be speaking to you and raising something up that may be kind of out of your consciousness. Like, for example, you know, it's on my mind that the coronavirus in India, I think 200,000 people have just died, and say, wow, God's kind of drawing me into something else. Right. And then also, you know, learning more if you're a Christian, learning more about Jesus. Right. So it's so how do you might not be able to say to God, what did you do today? Or how was your day today? But you can say, I'd like to know more about Jesus and what his life was like. Right. And what he cares about. So I think, honestly, I think if you're asking that question, it's not as much of a problem as people who don't ask that question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great question.
Well, I'll jump in. Hi, Father Jim. I'm Megan Way, and I'm a mother of a junior at Ursuline. And I'm still at the office. I'm writing an exam that I'm giving tomorrow at 8.
Oh my gosh.
I couldn't miss this. And I was just wondering who some of your favorite contemporary writers on prayer are.
Oh, what a nice question. And I see in your office, boy, you're really burning the midnight oil. That's a great question. I think my favorite would be Father Bill Barry. Father William Barry wrote many sort of small books over the years, and his book God and You, I think, is one of the best books on prayer I've ever ever read. And he uses that image of prayer as the personal relationship. In fact, that's the subtitle of the book. I find Joyce Rupp is very good. Joyce Rupp is a great. She's a sister, Catholic spiritual writer. She has a book called Prayer that's very simple. And then I also find a guy named Tom Green. Tom Green, he writes a book. He was a Jesuit from the Philippines. Wheat Among the Weeds, When the Well Runs Dry. Those are really good. And then I like books that kind of spark me to prayer, if that makes sense. Like there's a book. Oh my gosh, I always forget the title. My gosh. It's terrible. It's by Joyce Rupp, and it's basically hold on, can I get it for you, because it's really good. Hold on, I'll be right back. This is the show and tell part of our presentation. So this is a really nice book. I just love it. This is a hard name to remember. Fragments of Your Ancient Name. Okay. It's a little hard to remember. 365 Glimpses of the Divine. So what is it? It's 365 images of God. So I'm going to read you one. So what's today? Today's April 29th. So I'll read it today. So and they're little poems. So here's April 29th. The Resurrection, appropriate. Like a seed trampled underfoot, you overcame violence and took root. Like a flower wilted by a freeze, you lifted your head and newly bloomed. Like a stream gone dry in drought, you sought the source and survived. Like a tree bent over from the storm, you stood up straight and tall again. Like a faithful lover returning home, I welcome your risen presence now. Isn't that beautiful? So it just makes you want to pray. Like, it's not about prayer, but it just makes you want to pray. I find also Thomas Merton's book, New Seeds of Contemplation, does that. It just, I can see Kate nodding her head too, and a lot of people nodding. It just kind of makes you want to pray. It sort of brings you into that framework. So sometimes I think books that are like that are kind of prompts to prayer. I have that at the end of my book too. All these different books that are prompts to prayer are just as helpful as books that say, here's how you pray.
Thank you. You gave me some new ones.
Well, good. I'm glad. Any other questions or comments or anything you want to share about prayer?
I just have a quick follow on. I'm so glad you said that about reading books that inspire you to pray, but aren't necessarily really just, like I'm reading Sister Faustina's diary. Not easy, not like breeze through reading. Sometimes it's easier to read something else and then maybe think about, oh, well, how does that relate to mercy? And something like that. And I'm so glad that you brought up nature, because sometimes I just sit, I have a meditation cushion, look out the window, and just kind of, this sounds really corny or goofy, think about God, and then something comes to me, and we just have a conversation. So I'm so glad that you have expanded the definition of prayer to include things like that.
You're welcome. And look, I mean, first of all, yes, spiritual reading, like the kind of reading you're doing of St. Faustina and spiritual diaries, and it puts you in that frame of mind. And absolutely, in terms of nature prayer, that's I would say, one of the most ancient ways to pray, right? I mean, we tend to dismiss it, but look, if meditating on what is essentially, what is God's creation, can bring you into a sense of, speaking to God and feeling in God's presence, absolutely. I mean, one of the great lines from Laudato Si, Pope Francis's encyclical on the environment, which I love, is that Jesus enjoyed nature. So it's not just that he used it in his parables. I mean, as everybody knows, he enjoyed it, right? And so he was attentive. And so why shouldn't we? So thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it. Now I know. Thank you. So thanks, Nancy. Someone asked me to repeat this title, Fragments of Your Ancient Name. That's the Joyce Rupp book, Fragments of Your Ancient Name. And the name of my book is Learning to Pray.
Father, I have a question. During pandemic, the New Year's before pandemic fell upon us, I had kind of made a resolution to pay more attention to my prayer life. And specifically, my mother always prayed the 54-day rosary novena quite a lot. And she's become elderly and can't really do it. And I kind of wanted to pick up the mantle. So right before pandemic hit, I had kind of started doing this, and I loved it. I found it very peaceful and contemplative and all that. Pandemic hit, and I was so glad I had started. And I felt like my prayer life was very intense. It was a scary, the time was very frightening and all that. Now I've had my 2 vaccines. I'm back out in the world, and I can feel I'm losing this. And how can I get back on track, so to speak?
That's a great question. And Mary, can I call you Mary? Is that okay?
Oh, absolutely, please.
I would say, okay. If you're back out, you're back and sort of, vaccinated and all that. That time of prayer that you had with the rosary in that way, that may have fit where you were at that time. And you may be being invited into a different kind of relationship. So one of the things to do is to discern, do I want to go back to that because I feel like it will help me, or maybe God's inviting me into a new way of relating to God, right? Because, maybe you have less time. And to not feel like it's a burden, right? So one of the bad things would be is if you were unable to do it because of time, you have other things to do and you're out and about, and you felt bad. I'm a bad Catholic, or I'm a bad prayer, or I'm not faithful. When maybe God's inviting you into another kind of relationship, right? Maybe a different kind of prayer, or maybe maybe just the regular rosary, right? That can be just as meaningful. It's like, again, this model of the relationship is so helpful. So let's say that you are on a cruise with somebody, and you spend 6 hours a day talking to them, which is great, right? Or let's say, probably a better analogy, you're in the hospital with someone, and you happen to be in the hospital with someone, and you spend 7 hours a day just talking. You get super close. Now, when you get out back into your regular life, just because you can't speak to that person 7 hours a day, as wonderful as it was, does not mean you're a bad friend. It may be that you are called into a different kind of relationship. So one of the discernments is, why do I have this desire to stay on the 54, rosary? Does it make sense? Or maybe God's inviting me to something else. So to discern that, but don't feel bad if you can't do it because you're super busy.
Okay.
It's like, like when we go on a retreat, if you've ever been on a retreat, you have, endless time, and it's great. It's wonderful, but that's not the way that we are able to pray day to day. Yeah.
Thank you, Father.
You're welcome. Good question.
Father Jim, we have an interesting question that's been posed in the group about the connection between music and prayer. And if you have any experiences or insights into the connection between the two.
Yeah, well, I think it was at St. Augustine that said, he who sings or she who sings prays twice. And so I don't have anything, you're probably the first time you're going to hear a Jesuit say this. I don't have anything particularly profound to say about that topic. I'm not a musician, but I will just say that it helps you to pray. And oftentimes a hymn can just move you to tears, and to pay attention to music as a way of praying. Certainly when I'm in Mass and I hear hymns or I sing hymns, I feel moved in a different way. So yeah, it is another way to pray. It is another way to encounter God. I think for a musician, I don't play an instrument, but I would imagine a musician also sort of feels that. One of my favorite musicians who has been very active in the pandemic is Yo-Yo Ma. I'm sure everybody knows him in Boston. And when I see him play, I think, oh my gosh, the act of playing must be so spiritual for him. So yeah, to see it as an avenue for prayer. But again, it's not something that everyone has to do. If you don't pray with music, I sometimes put on meditation music to pray that helps me to pray. But I also sometimes find that music can be a distraction. So it depends on the person. So I wouldn't say everyone has to pray with music. And I also wouldn't say that, no one should pray with music. So it's all about discernment.
Father, my name is Glenn, and I'm the grandpa in Anchorage, Alaska.
Oh, welcome. What time is it out there?
Just going on 5 o'clock out here.
And how's the weather?
Actually, we've had great weather. It rained a little bit today, but we've been in the 60s. So we've been actually, I think, warmer than you guys.
Well,
but
okay.
I just wanted to ask, I think, how important is it in prayer to establish, if prayer is establishing a relationship with God, how important is it that relationship be with God the Father? I think in your book, you talk about the Monty Python clip where the Anglican priest is leading his congregation in this prayer that is, we're so impressed with you down here and you're so super, and I think as a Catholic, I think it's always been easier for me to address my prayer through either a saint or even to establish a relationship with Jesus. But how important is it that relationship be with God, the Father?
Well, it depends on the person. And so, look, theologically, it's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. They're all present to one another, right? So we believe that. So when you're praying to Jesus, you're praying to the Trinity. You're praying to God, the Father, as well as the Spirit. Certainly the Spirit is the primary way that we encounter God now, right? So we're all praying kind of with the Spirit and through the Spirit. I think it depends on the person. So I would say if a person says to me, I prefer to pray to Jesus. Now, I think we need to distinguish between praying to the saints for their intercession and Jesus, right? And God, right? So who the saint we celebrate today, Catherine of Siena, would never say you should, just sort of supplant Jesus with her, which I know you're not saying. There are patrons, there are companions. We pray to St. Angela Merici, but that's not the sort of focus or the object of our prayer. But to your point, I know plenty of people who never pray to God the Father. They just don't. It's all about Jesus. And I know plenty of people who pray just to God. And it's fine, but they're all connect. They're all sort of present to one another. It depends on the person. A lot of people feel, for example, people will say to me, I prefer to be in God's presence. And in my spiritual direction, when I'm doing direction, I'll say to people, what do you mean? Talking about Jesus, or what do you mean? No, I mean just God's presence. Okay, that's fine. Or I prefer to pray with Jesus. So it's fine. Or the Spirit. Not as many Catholics think of the Spirit, but that's sort of how we're praying. So I would say whatever suits you. This, God meets us where we are. I would also say that for many people, this is a whole other topic, the images they have of God sometimes need to be sort of challenged. God is the judge, only the judge. And one of the easiest ways to do that, Glenn, is focusing on Jesus, who is, today's reading, I am, right? He is both the revelation and the revealer. And so you're praying to God. He who has seen me has seen the Father.
Who is ultimately our judge, right?
Yeah, right. Who's the judge, right? But hopefully a merciful judge. So I think wherever it's fine. That's fine. I don't think you have to. I really don't think but sometimes in direction, what I'll say to people is I'll sometimes encourage them. If it's all about, and this happens a lot. Actually, I haven't thought about this in a while, and you're bringing me to recognize this. There are a lot of people who are Christians who it's God, 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 which is fine, obviously. And I will sometimes challenge them and say, where's Jesus in all this? Just to challenge them. And then it's just to kind of invite them to get to know Jesus, because it's been kind of a mix for me. I've been a director for 20 years and it's been kind of a mix. But I'd say it's half God and half Jesus for most Catholics. And then almost no one talks about the Spirit. We have a very, as I'm sure you've heard, we have a very sort of impoverished understanding of the Trinity. As one friend of mine says, and it's not a diss on Catholics, I'm Catholic too. Most Catholics think about the old man, Jesus, and the bird. That's their understanding of the Trinity. So we have to kind of expand our understanding of, like a community of persons or a community of love, or, so anyway, but yeah, it's a great question. It's a common question and direction too. Thanks, Glenn. Maybe one more question and then we can conclude. Anyone else?
Hi, Father Martin. Marie Kluker. I'm class of 04. And it's great to be with you. And I had a question. Everyone can pray. And I was thinking about 3 little kids who are about to turn 6, 4, and 2. And I know you're not like a child developmental specialist, right? But, and we pray with our kids and read them the Bible and things like that. But just thinking about like how to continue to develop this sense of relationship. I think about like, I've heard people say, oh, just while you're out, you can just say like, oh, what a beautiful sunset God made, or like,
it's nice
out loud to your kids about what you're saying, what I'm saying to Jesus. Like I don't know. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, I always say, obviously you can see from the collar, I don't have kids, but I had, I have nephews and they were little ones. And I think what you're suggesting makes a lot of sense. You have tons more experience than I do. So I think talking to them about the way that you relate to God, I think something like that, what a beautiful sunset God made. That's a great invitation for them to think about who God is, God, the creator. I also think, encouraging them maybe to talk to you about, who's God for you? What do you think about God? And maybe encouraging them to express their prayers verbally, and encouraging them to be creative. I think kids are not every kid at every time, they're naturally religious, right? And they don't have a lot of kind of expectations and shoulds, and you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't pray like that. So that, let's pray together. You want to ask God for something, or you want to talk to God. Maybe at the end of the day, let's look back at the day. The examination of conscience, I think, is really good for kids. Let's look at the places. Tell me 3 places you feel like God was there with you. And sometimes it's surprising. So I think helping them verbalize, helping them feel comfortable, as you were saying, just showing them your own faith, that it's okay to talk about God. One of the experiences I put in my book, which kind of shocked me, was I was with my nephew who was, I don't know, about 8, 9. He's all over this book because he did all these like cute things when he was little. And so we were at Christmas Eve Mass at his parish out in New Jersey. And I said, let's go up and see the Christmas crib. And, it was packed. It was like the family Mass was crazy. It was beautiful, though. It was like Jesus kind of buried in these poinsettias. It was beautiful. And there's Jesus, in the little manger and everything. And so I walked up with Matthew, and he was very little. He was holding my hand, and So we're just standing there, and I said something to you, what you're talking about. Do you want to say anything to Jesus? And I honestly, I thought he was going to say, I want a sled, or I want a Game Boy or whatever. And he's not a super pious kid. And he said, make me a good boy, Jesus. And I just thought that's so sweet. Like, and I didn't prompt that. And I didn't say, ask Jesus to make you a good boy. And it was very unselfconscious. And I just found that really beautiful. And that was that. It wasn't like he knelt down and burst into tears. It was just, that was his prayer. So I think they're naturally, they're more open than adults would be. So just to encourage that openness. Yeah. So it sounds like you're doing a great job. What did you say? 6, 4, and 2?
You're about to be, yeah.
Oh my gosh, you're going to go right to heaven. It's amazing.
With prayer.
That's right. With prayer, with their prayers. Right. Anyway, thanks. That's a great question. Thank you. Well, listen, I know we're getting to the end. I know people are going to want to wrap up, but I just want to say thanks for your time. I'm really happy to be with you in your homes, answer your questions. Again, if I know I couldn't get to all your questions, but they are all answered in Learning to Pray. I mean, it's pretty much every question I've ever been asked about prayer. And most importantly, congratulations to Ursuline Academy. And thanks to Kate and Mary Kate for setting this up. And I'm really happy to be with you tonight.
Thank you so much, Father.
Father Jim, thank you so very much for being with us. This has been just a wonderful hour. And while it's been just an hour, I think this will continue for all of us to have long lasting and benefits for our lives. So thank you very, very much for being here. I also want to thank all of my colleagues. Every event, anything that we do at Ursuline, there's a remarkable team of really talented and devoted people behind the scenes, from the publicity, the technology, the outreach to Father Jim. I'm just really grateful for the faculty and staff at Ursuline for all that they do day in and day out. And finally, my thanks to each and every one of you who are here tonight. Ursuline is not a building. Ursuline, much like the church, is made up of the people who have such a commitment to the school. So thank you for being here, for reconnecting or continuing your connection with Ursuline during this 75th year. We have many, many more events coming up. The next 2 events in our speaker series on May 20th at 7:30, there'll be another Zoom call from Brescia to Dedham. And that is from St. Angela Merici's founding of the Ursuline Order all the way through our history to Dedham, all in 1 hour. So imagine that time travel. And then we'll also have Mark Shriver with us as a guest speaker on June 16th, right around Father's Day. He has a new book and some insights on fatherhood to share with us as well. So again, my thanks to each and every one of you. As we emerge from the pandemic, know that our prayers are with you for continued good health and strength. And we look forward to seeing you either virtually or in person at Ursuline events in the future. If you are eager to participate or to volunteer or to see if you can help out behind the scenes, we have a new email address, 75years@ursulineacademy.net, which you'll see at the very bottom of the screen. Drop us an email and we can certainly find a way to connect you if you'd like to pitch in. We've got committees galore and lots of fun going on as we put together the fun and the celebration that will continue through June of 2022. Thanks everyone. Be well, stay healthy and strong, and God bless. Bye-bye now.